Whispering Pines Resort, 8:00 p.m. The slap cracked like a gunshot, silencing the string quartet instantly. My name is Anne Mitchell, and I am standing in a luxury ballroom paid for with money stolen from my own bank account. To my family, I am a disappointment, a failure with a small life. They have no idea I am actually the CEO of the company they embezzled from to fund this six-figure party. My mother thinks she just disciplined a child. She doesn't realize she just handed the evidence to the prosecution. Tonight, the music stops and the audit begins. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The sound wasn't a thud. It was a crack, sharp and dry like a branch snapping in a dead forest. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the ballroom, bouncing between the crystal chandeliers and the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the manicured golf course. For a split second, the physics of it didn't make sense to me. The heat on my left cheek arrived a full second after the noise blooming across my skin like a chemical burn. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. The murmur of 200 guests sipping champagne, adjusting their ties, whispering about the floral arrangements, vanished instantly, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I could smell the orchids from the centerpiece next to me, a sickly sweet scent that suddenly made me want to gag. I could hear the high-pitched whine of microphone feedback from the stage where my sister Claire stood frozen in her white silk dress. And I could see my mother Linda. Her hand was still raised, hovering in the space between us. Her chest was heaving, the sequins on her gown catching the light, but her face wasn't contorted in rage. It was composed. It was the face of a woman who believed she was correcting a mistake. To everyone in that room, I was the mistake. I didn't reach up to touch my face. I didn't cry out. I didn't stumble. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting the humiliation settle into the marrow of my bones. Because in a way, this slap was inevitable. It was the physical manifestation of 28 years of being the Mitchell family's designated disappointment. But what the room didn't know, what my mother, with her hands still trembling in the air, didn't know, was that the woman she just struck wasn't the daughter she thought she had. She thought she was disciplining Anne, the failure Anne, the drifter Anne, with her little online projects. She didn't know she had just assaulted the CEO of AM Harbor Group, a holding company that silently owned a significant portfolio of logistics firms and commercial real estate across the tri-state area. She didn't know that the very venue we were standing in leased its land from a subsidiary I acquired 3 years ago. And she certainly didn't know that the reason I was standing there taking the hit wasn't because I sought her forgiveness. It was because I was building a case. But to understand why I stood there and took it, you have to understand the architecture of my family. In the Mitchell household, love was a currency, and the exchange rate was brutal. My father, Robert, was the charm, the handshake, the family finances, the man who could talk a waiter into a free bottle of wine while quietly terrified of his own bank balance. My mother, Linda, was the image, the enforcer of status, the woman who would rather starve than be seen in last season's coat. And then there was Claire. Claire was the golden child, the investment. She was beautiful, pliable, and perfectly curated to marry well and reflect glory back onto our parents. Then there was me. I was the one who asked too many questions. I was the one who didn't care about the country club membership if we couldn't afford to fix the leaking roof. By the time I was 18, the narrative was set. Claire was the future. Anne was the problem. I left home with 2 suitcases and a distinct lack of fanfare, moving 3 states away to a city where the name Mitchell meant nothing. I wanted to see if I could survive without the suffocating weight of their expectations. I did more than survive. I thrived. But I did it in the shadows. I started small, flipping distressed inventory online, sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and ambition. I learned the hard way that in America freedom isn't given, it's bought. I ate ramen for 3 years so I could reinvest every cent. I taught myself supply chain management, corporate structuring, and tax law. When my first company started turning a real profit, I didn't buy a Porsche. I bought a failing trucking depot, rebranded it, and optimized the routes. That depot became 3, then 10, then a regional network. I buried my name under layers of LLCs, AM Harbor Group, Blue Pine Logistics, Venn Holdings. I never told my family, not a word. When I visited for holidays, I parked my rental car around the corner. When they asked what I was doing, I told them I was freelancing or doing data entry. I watched their eyes glaze over with a mix of pity and relief. It suited them to have me as the failure. It made Claire's shine even brighter. And truthfully, I kept it quiet because I wanted the one thing money couldn't buy. I wanted to know if they could love me just for me. If I showed up in a Chanel suit with a driver, I knew exactly how they'd treat me. They would love my wallet. I wanted them to love their daughter. So for years I played the role. I let them mock my little work. I let my father give me unsolicited, terrible business advice while I mentally calculated the ROI of the acquisition I was closing that afternoon. I let my mother sigh and tell neighbors, "Anne is finding herself," in a tone that suggested I was lost in a gutter somewhere. I endured it because I held on to a childish hope that one day I would do something good enough to earn a seat at the table without having to buy the table first. That hope died 2 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday. I was in my office, a corner suite overlooking the harbor, glass and steel, quiet and efficient, when my CFO, a terrifyingly competent woman named Maya, flagged me down. "We have an anomaly in the vendor audit for the Q3 expansion," she said, sliding a tablet across my desk. "Specifically in the accounts payable for the event coordination sector." I frowned, scrolling through the data. We rarely handled events directly, usually outsourcing through approved vendors. "What's the issue?" "We have a series of invoices categorized under consulting and design," Maya explained, her voice level. "But the vendor name didn't clear our vetting process. The tax ID leads back to a shell company formed 3 months ago, and the billing address matches a residential property." I looked at the address. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just a residential property. It was my parents' house. My blood ran cold. I dug deeper. The invoices were for staggering amounts, 10,000 here, 15,000 there. They were being paid out of a subsidiary account I rarely monitored personally, one used for community outreach and local sponsorships. Someone had gotten into the system. Someone had authorized these payments. And the descriptions on the invoices weren't for logistics or consulting. When I cross-referenced the transaction codes, they mapped to luxury vendors, high-end florists, a boutique catering firm, a custom jeweler. I pulled up the dates. They aligned perfectly with the timeline of Claire's engagement to Ethan, a nice guy from a good family who had no idea he was marrying into a house of cards. My parents weren't just spending money they didn't have. That was their standard operating procedure. This was different. They were funneling money out of my company. The betrayal was so specific, so intimate, it felt like a physical blow. How did they get access? I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that I had used my mother's maiden name as a security question on an old, dormant admin account years ago. Or perhaps I had left a laptop open during a visit. It didn't matter how. It mattered that they had found a way to bleed me, and instead of asking, instead of admitting they were drowning, they stole. They stole to fund a party designed to show the world how successful they were, using the money of the daughter they were ashamed of. That was the moment the daughter part of me went into hibernation and the CEO took the wheel. I didn't call the police immediately. I didn't call them screaming. I told Maya to freeze nothing. "Let the transactions go through," I said. "Track every single cent. I want the receipts. I want the timestamps. I want to know exactly what my money bought." I needed to see it. I needed to witness the fraud in 3 dimensions. That's why I came to the engagement party. The venue was the Whispering Pines Resort, a place that reeked of old money and desperation. As I drove up the winding driveway in my unassuming sedan, I saw the valet stand crowded with luxury SUVs. The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. I could see the setup through the open French doors of the ballroom, champagne towers that defied gravity, walls made entirely of imported white roses, a lighting rig that probably cost more than my first apartment. It was a six-figure performance. A stage play called The Mitchells Are Thriving, funded by the larceny of the Mitchell Who Failed. I parked my own car, ignoring the valet. I needed the walk. The night air was crisp, but I was sweating. Not from nerves exactly, but from a vibrating intensity, a sense of impending collision. I checked my phone, a message from Marcus, my COO and head of security operations. We're in position. Digital trail is secured. Waiting on your signal. I took a breath, smoothing the fabric of my dress. It was a simple black number, elegant, but understated, the kind of thing that screams quality to people who know fabrics and boring to people who like logos. I wasn't here to flex. I wasn't here to storm in and flip tables. I was here to give them one last chance. A part of me, the stupid part that still remembered being 6 years old and wanting my dad to pick me up, thought, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe they're desperate. Maybe if I look them in the eye, I'll see guilt. I walked up the stone steps, the music drifting out to meet me. I could hear laughter, bright, brittle, expensive laughter. I stepped through the double doors and into the golden light of the ballroom. The sensory overload was immediate. The smell of expensive perfume, the clink of crystal, the visual assault of pastels and gold leaf. I stood at the entrance for a moment, scanning the room. I saw the floral arrangements, my money. I saw the catering staff circulating with trays of lobster, my money. I saw the band playing on a raised platform, my money. And then I saw my mother. She was holding court near the center of the room, a glass of champagne in one hand, gesturing expansively with the other. She looked radiant in that terrifying, polished way of hers. She was laughing at something a neighbor said, her head thrown back. Then her gaze swept across the room and landed on me. The laughter stopped. Her expression didn't shift to surprise. She didn't look happy to see her daughter. She didn't look guilty. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her lip curling just a fraction. It was a look of annoyance, pure, unadulterated irritation. It was the look you give a stain on a white tablecloth or a waiter who dropped a fork. It was a look that said, "Why are you here? You ruin the aesthetic." She excused herself from her circle and began to move toward me, not with open arms, but with the purposeful stride of a manager coming to deal with a complaint. I didn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot, my hands at my sides, watching her come. I knew with absolute certainty that tonight was going to end in ruins. The only question was, whose life would be left standing when the dust cleared? I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of stolen flowers, and prepared to play my part. I was the disappointment after all. I might as well give them a show. My mother stopped 2 feet in front of me, her smile tight enough to snap a violin string. She didn't hug me. She didn't reach out. She simply scanned me from head to toe, her eyes lingering on my dress with a performance of pained tolerance. "You made it," Linda said, her voice pitched perfectly to carry to the nearby guests without sounding aggressive. It was a tone she had perfected over decades, warmth with a razor blade hidden inside. "And you wore that. It's very practical, Anne. Very sensible." "It's good to see you, Mom," I said, ignoring the barb. I kept my voice neutral, my hands unclenched at my sides. "The venue looks incredible." "We do what we can for family." She sighed, a martyr in sequins. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. The warmth evaporated instantly. "Don't make a scene tonight. Don't go cornering people with your little stories about your struggles. These are important people, Anne. Claire's future in-laws are here. Just try to blend in, over there." She gestured vaguely toward a dimly lit corner near the kitchen doors, far away from the head table, far away from the cameras, and certainly far away from the open bar, where the important people were congregating. It was a masterclass in social herding. She wasn't just welcoming me. She was containing me. She was treating me like a reactive dog that needed to be kept on a short leash. "I'll find my way," I said, stepping around her. "Just don't drink too much," she called after me. Her voice suddenly bright again for the benefit of a passing waiter. We know how emotional you get. I walked deeper into the room, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I felt the familiar burn of shame in my chest, the old reflex to shrink to apologize for taking up space. But I forced it down. I wasn't that person anymore. I was a CEO conducting a site inspection. I switched my focus from my mother's voice to the room itself, looking at the details with the cold, analytical eye of a forensic accountant. That's when the room stopped being a party and started becoming a crime scene. I moved toward the floral arrangements flanking the stage. They were massive cascading structures of white phalaenopsis orchids and imported hydrangeas. Beautiful, certainly. But I recognized the wiring technique used to secure the stems, a specific double-braid copper wire that was the signature of Vandermeer & Co., a ultra-high-end floral design firm in the city. I knew them because I had just negotiated an exclusive vendor contract with them for my company's boutique hotels 3 months ago. They didn't do one-off weddings for suburban families. They did corporate galas and royalty. I walked past the AV booth. The technician was adjusting a soundboard that looked like the cockpit of a jet. He was wearing a black polo shirt with a small embroidered logo on the sleeve, Apex Audio. My heart hammered against my ribs. Apex was another one of my approved vendors. I had authorized a massive retainer for them last year to handle the AV for our regional conferences. I stopped a waiter passing with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Excuse me," I said gently. "These look wonderful. Who is the caterer?" "It's Lumiere, ma'am," he said, flashing a tired smile. "Based out of the city." Lumiere. I nodded, thanked him, and took a tart I didn't eat. Lumiere was the preferred catering partner for AM Harbor Group's executive retreats. The pattern was undeniable. These weren't random choices. My parents hadn't just stolen money, they had stolen my infrastructure. They had used my company's vendor portal, likely logging in with the credentials I'd foolishly left accessible during a visit, and they had booked this entire event as a corporate function. They were leveraging my negotiated rates, my credit lines, and my reputation. Every bite of food in this room, every flower, every note of music was being paid for by the little work they mocked so relentlessly. "Anne, oh God, you're here!" I turned to see Claire approaching. She looked stunning, I had to give her that. Her dress was a cloud of silk, her hair swept up in a style that probably cost more than my first car, but her eyes were anxious. She was flanked by Ethan, her fiancé, who looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, like he was afraid he might break something. "Hi, Claire," I said. "You look beautiful." "Thanks," she said, glancing around nervously as if checking for our mother. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Mom said you were busy with the internet stuff." Ethan smiled politely. "It's good to meet you, Anne. Claire says you do freelance web design." I looked at him. He was a decent guy. He had a kind face. He had no idea he was standing in the middle of a felony. "Something like that," I said. "It keeps the lights on." "That's great," Ethan said earnestly. "My cousin does Etsy. It's tough out there." "Anne doesn't really have a head for business," Claire said quickly, a reflexive dismissal she had learned at the dinner table. She laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "She's the creative one, the dreamer. Remember that time you tried to sell those painted rocks, Anne?" I was 8 years old when I sold painted rocks. I am 29 now. But in this room, time was a flat circle. "I remember," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was vibrating. "Ethan, this is quite a party. Did Robert and Linda handle all the planning?" "Oh yeah," Ethan beamed. "They've been incredible. Said they wanted to give Claire the princess treatment. I tried to chip in, offer to pay for the bar at least, but Robert wouldn't hear of it. Said he had connections and wanted to bless us." "Connections," I repeated. "That's generous." "They really stepped up," Claire added, touching her necklace, a diamond pendant that caught the light. "I know things have been weird with you and them, but they really are trying, Anne. Maybe you could just be happy for us, without analyzing everything." "I am happy for you, Claire," I said. And I was. I wanted her to be happy. I just didn't want her happiness to be a stolen good. Before I could answer further, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I didn't flinch, but the smell of expensive scotch and Old Spice announced my father before he even spoke. "There she is," Robert boomed, his voice too loud, performing the role of the jovial patriarch. He squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Bothering the happy couple with your questions, Anne?" "Just catching up, Dad," I said. He steered me away from them, his grip tightening. He walked me toward a pillar away from the ears of the important people. His smile dropped the second our backs were turned to the room. "Look," he hissed, his face close to mine. "I don't know why you came, but if you embarrass us tonight, if you start talking about your little problems or asking for money, I will have security escort you out. This is Claire's night. Do you understand? For once in your life, don't make it about you." I looked at him. He was aging. The lines around his eyes were deeper. He looked tired, but the arrogance was still there, the absolute certainty that he could control the narrative. "I'm not here to ask for money, Dad," I said quietly. "I actually wanted to ask you about the vendors. The flowers are stunning. Who did you use?" He didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. "Oh, just a local gal, friend of a friend, gave us a discount for cash. You know how I operate, Anne, always finding a deal." The lie was so smooth it was almost admirable. A local gal. He was standing in front of $10,000 worth of Vandermeer orchids and calling them a cash discount from a friend. He didn't just lie to protect himself. He lied because he thought I was too stupid to know the difference. He thought I belonged in the world of painted rocks, not the world of corporate contracts. That was the moment. That was the click. I had come here looking for a reason to forgive them. I was looking for a sign of desperation, a hint that they were drowning and just made a mistake. But this wasn't desperation. This was contempt. He was stealing from me and laughing about it, secure in the belief that I was too insignificant to catch him. "Right," I said. "You always were good with deals." "Damn right," he said, releasing my arm. "Now go get a drink, and smile for God's sake. You look like a funeral." I watched him walk away, back to the bar, back to slapping backs and shaking hands, playing the role of the benevolent king of the castle. I stood by the pillar, feeling the cold rage solidify in my stomach. It wasn't hot anymore. It was ice. I checked my phone. A text from Marcus. "We have the IP logs. The orders were placed from a desktop at 42 Maple Drive, your parents' home IP. The user account was admin AM. It's confirmed, Anne. It's them." I closed my eyes for a second. 42 Maple Drive. The house I grew up in. The house where I was told I wasn't enough. "Attention, everyone. Attention, please." The DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. The room quieted down. "If we could have the family come up to the stage for a toast, Mom, Dad, and is the sister here, Anne?" I froze. I hadn't planned on going on stage. I wanted to stay in the shadows until I was ready, but the spotlight swept the room, searching until it blinded me. "There she is!" the DJ shouted. "Come on up, Anne. Let's hear it for the big sister." There was a smattering of polite applause. I had no choice. If I refused, I was the jealous shrew. If I went up, I was walking into the lion's den. I walked toward the stage, my legs moving mechanically. Linda was already there, holding a microphone, beaming. Robert was next to her, arm around Claire. They looked like a magazine cover. I stepped up onto the riser. The lights were hot. The faces in the crowd were a blur of expectant smiles. Linda handed me the microphone with a look that said, "Keep it short and don't ruin this." "Just say something supportive," she whispered through her teeth, smiling at the crowd. "Don't be weird." I took the mic. I looked at Claire. She looked hopeful. I looked at my parents. They looked predatory. And then I looked at the crowd, 200 people witnessing a fraud. I started. The feedback whined slightly. "I'm happy to be here. Truly." "Louder," someone shouted from the back. "I'm happy," I said, my voice gaining strength, "because weddings are about truth. They're about showing the world exactly who you are. And tonight, Tonight is certainly a revelation. I saw Linda's smile falter. She took a half step toward me. I look at this room. I continued gesturing to the flowers, the lights, and I see so much. I see the cost of things. I see where things come from. And my only hope for Claire and Ethan is that their marriage is built on something real, something honest. Because beautiful things that are paid for with secrets, they don't last. The room went quiet. It wasn't a toast. It was a warning. Linda snatched the microphone from my hand. The feedback screeched. "Thank you, Anne," she shrilled, her voice tight with panic. "Always so poetic. Give it up for Anne, everyone." She turned her back to the crowd, blocking me from view with her body. Her face was contorted, the mask completely gone. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You jealous, miserable little nothing. You couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't stand seeing Claire have one nice thing." "It's not her thing, Mom," I said calmly. "It's mine." "Yours?" She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You have nothing. You are nothing. You're a failure, Anne. You always have been. You're just a little parasite we keep around out of pity. Your work is a joke. You are a joke." "I know about the invoices, Linda," I said. That was the trigger. I didn't say Mom. I said Linda. And I mentioned the money. Her eyes went wide, panic warring with fury. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just reacted to the threat the only way she knew how. She swung. It wasn't a cinematic slap. It was messy and desperate. Her palm connected hard with my cheekbone, the force of it snapping my head to the side. The sound cracked through the microphone she was still clutching against her chest. Crack! The gasp from the room was immediate. The music cut out. I stood there, my face stinging, the red imprint of her hand burning into my skin. I could feel the eyes of every single person in the room boring into me. Ethan had stepped forward, his mouth open. Claire was frozen, her hands over her mouth. Robert looked like he was about to have a stroke. But I didn't cry. I waited for the tears. I waited for the crushing weight of rejection to buckle my knees. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. The connection was severed. The cord was cut. The part of me that was their daughter, the part that wanted to be good, to be loved, to be accepted, died in that silence. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. Linda was breathing hard. Her hand still raised, her eyes wide with the realization of what she had just done in front of everyone. She looked terrifying, but she also looked small. I looked out at the crowd. I saw the shock. I saw the judgment. And I realized something powerful. If I ran away now crying, I would be the victim. I would be the unstable daughter who pushed her mother too far. The story would be theirs to tell. They would spin it. Anne was drunk. Anne was hysterical. Linda had no choice. But if I stayed and if I spoke, I could burn the whole false kingdom to the ground. I looked at the microphone in Linda's hand. I reached out and gently, firmly took it back. She was too shocked to stop me. I turned to the room. My cheek was throbbing, but my voice was steady. I wasn't leaving. I was just getting started. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents 30 feet above us. The feedback from the microphone had died down, leaving a heavy, static silence that felt like the pressure change before a tornado. Linda stood a few feet away from me, her chest heaving, her face a mask of rapidly fracturing porcelain. She looked at the guests, then at Robert, then at me, her eyes darting with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. She expected me to crumble. She expected the daughter who used to hide in her room to drop the microphone and run, leaving her to smooth over the incident with a laugh and another round of drinks. But I didn't drop the microphone. I tightened my grip on it. "I'm going to leave," I said. My voice was low, devoid of tears, amplified clearly through the ballroom speakers. "I'm going to walk out those doors and I'm never coming back. But before I do, there is something you need to understand. I need everyone here to understand exactly what you are standing inside. Cut the mic! Robert barked, stepping toward the edge of the stage. He gestured aggressively at the sound booth. Cut the damn sound! The technician in the booth didn't move. He was looking at his screen where a new command had just overridden the system. My eyes flicked to the back of the room, where Marcus stood by the door, his phone in hand. He gave me a single imperceptible nod. You've spent the last 10 years telling everyone that I'm small. I continued, turning my gaze to my parents. That I'm a failure. That I do little work on the internet while you support the family. You've built an entire mythology around my incompetence to highlight your own success. Anne, stop this, Linda hissed, reaching for me again. You are embarrassing yourself. I took a step back out of her reach. I don't do freelance web design, Mother. I am the founder and majority shareholder of AM Harbor Group. My company employs 400 people across 3 states. We manage logistics for half the commercial sector in this county. I paused, letting the words land. I saw a ripple of confusion move through the crowd. A few of the business owners in the room, men my father had been trying to impress all night, straightened up, recognizing the name. Some of my employees are in this room right now, I said, looking directly at the catering staff at the AV Tech. And for the last 2 weeks, someone has been stealing from them. She's drunk, Robert shouted, his voice cracking. He lunged for the stage stairs. Security, get her out of here. Marcus, I said. The large screen behind us, which had been cycling through a slideshow of Claire and Ethan's engagement photos, Claire at the beach, Ethan on a boat, the happy couple in Paris, suddenly flickered. The image of their smiling faces vanished. In its place, a high-resolution spreadsheet appeared. It was stark white and brutal in its clarity. What is that? Someone whispered in the front row. These are invoice logs from my company's internal vendor portal, I said, pointing to the screen. You can see the dates. October 12th, October 15th, October 18th. The text on the screen was massive. Everyone could read it. Vendor Vandermeer Floral Design. Amount $12,500. Status paid. Vendor Lumiere Catering. Amount $24,000. Status paid. Vendor Apex Audio. Amount $8,000. Status paid. These are the vendors servicing this party. I explained, my voice clinical, like I was presenting a quarterly report. The flowers you're smelling, the food you're eating, the sound system I'm speaking into, all of it was billed to AM Harbor Group under the project code Community Outreach. But my company didn't authorize this event. This is fake, Linda screamed. She turned to the crowd, her arms wide. She made this up. She's good with computers. She forged it. Look at the authorization column, I said. The slide changed. It zoomed in on the digital signature used to approve the wires. Authorized by Admin AM. IP address 192.168.1.42. Residential 42 Maple Drive. That is the IP address of my parents' home router, I said. An Admin AM is a dormant account I haven't used in 5 years. The only people with physical access to the device that logged in are the people standing on this stage. The room had gone past silence into a state of suspended animation. The guests were staring at the screen, then at the flowers on their tables, connecting the dots. The luxury, the excess, the generosity of the Mitchell family. It wasn't wealth, it was loot. You stole $45,000 from my company in 2 weeks, I said, turning to face my father. He had stopped halfway up the stairs, his face a mottled shade of gray. But that wasn't enough, was it? Because when I started digging, I found the other accounts. I signaled Marcus again. The screen shifted. This time it wasn't a corporate spreadsheet. It was a credit report, a personal one. This is my credit history, I said. Or rather, it's the history of a credit line opened in my name when I was 18 years old, 3 days after I left for college. I didn't open it, but the billing address is 42 Maple Drive. The screen scrolled down. Years of charges, furniture, vacations, car lease payments. You didn't just steal from my business to throw a party, I said, the cold anger finally warming into something sharper, something that felt like justice. You've been stealing my identity for a decade. You use my social security number to subsidize the lifestyle you couldn't afford, all while telling the world I was the one who couldn't make it. The twist landed. The crowd wasn't just looking at a dispute over a party anymore. They were looking at a long con. They were looking at parents who had cannibalized their own child to keep up appearances. Ethan stepped forward. He looked pale, like he was going to be sick. He walked past me, past Linda, and stopped in front of Claire. "Claire," he said, his voice shaking. "Did you know?" Claire stood frozen. She looked at the screen where the evidence of her dream engagement was laid out in black and red numbers. She looked at our mother, who was now weeping into her hands, a performative wailing sound that fooled no one. Then she looked at me. I saw the struggle in her face. I saw the moment she weighed her comfort against the truth. She could claim ignorance. She could play the victim. But in that moment, seeing the sheer scale of the deception, something in her broke. Claire's voice was a whisper. Tears spilled over her lashes. "I asked them how we could afford the Vandermeer flowers. Mom said you chipped in. She said you wanted to surprise me but didn't want the credit." A gasp rippled through the room. "She told me you finally wanted to be part of the family." Claire sobbed, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "She said this was your gift." It was a brilliant lie. It made them look like the facilitators of reconciliation while simultaneously funding their fraud. It was so perfectly, diabolically Linda. "I didn't give this gift, Claire," I said gently. "They took it." "You ungrateful brat!" Linda shrieked, dropping the mask of the victim and lunging at me again. This time Robert caught her arm, holding her back, but his eyes were fixed on me with pure hatred. "We raised you. We gave you life. What is a little money compared to what you owe us? You have so much, and you share nothing. You hoard it while your family struggles." "I would have given you anything," I said, "if you had asked. If you had treated me like a person, and not an ATM with a pulse. But you didn't ask. You stole." "It was a misunderstanding," Robert bellowed to the room, trying to regain control of the narrative. "A clerical error. My daughter she's unwell. She's off her medication. This is all a delusion." "The timestamp on the last transfer was yesterday at 4:15 p.m., I said, cutting through his bluster. "I was in a board meeting. You were at the golf course. The GPS data from your phone confirms you were at the house when the transfer was authorized." I looked out at the audience. "I'm not unstable. I'm not off my medication. I'm a CEO who protects her assets. And unfortunately, today, those assets include the evidence of grand larceny and identity theft." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I held it up. "This isn't a speech," I said. "This is a notification. An hour before I walked into this room, my legal team filed a formal report with the district attorney's office for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. We've also frozen the vendor accounts. The police aren't on their way, Robert. They're already waiting in the lobby." That was the kill shot. The air left the room. Robert slumped against the podium, the fight draining out of him as the reality of prison time collided with his ego. Linda stopped screaming and stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. But I wasn't done. I had one last thing to say. The slap was still throbbing on my face, a dull ache that reminded me of every other time they had made me feel small. "You hit me," I said, turning to Linda. "You hit me in front of everyone because you thought it would make me stop. You thought shame would work. It always worked before." I touched my cheek. "When I was 7, you slapped me because I wore the wrong shoes to church. When I was 12, you slapped me because I got a B in math. You told me it was because you wanted me to be better. You told me it was love." I looked her dead in the eye. "But you don't steal from people you love. You don't lie to people you love. And you certainly don't hit people you love." I placed the microphone gently on the stand. It made a soft thud. "You don't get to hit me and call it love anymore." I turned my back on them. I turned my back on the screen glowing with their crimes. I turned my back on Claire, who was weeping in Ethan's arms. Her dream shattered, but her eyes finally open. The room was chaos. People were standing up, whispering, checking their phones. I saw the resort manager talking hurriedly into a radio. I saw the important people backing away from my parents like they were contagious. But I didn't stop to watch the fallout. I walked down the stairs, my head high, my steps steady on the plush carpet. I walked past the guests who had laughed at my little work an hour ago. They parted from me like the Red Sea, their expressions a mix of awe and terror. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the exit signs. As I pushed through the double doors and into the cool night air, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt light. It was the feeling of dropping a heavy pack after a long hike. I had burned the bridge, yes, but the fire was the only light I had seen in years. The moment the heavy oak doors of the resort swung shut behind me, the sound of the ballroom was severed. The string quartet, the murmurs, the shouting, it all vanished, replaced by the silence of the valet loop and the chirping of crickets in the manicured hedges. The air was biting cold, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the stage. I walked to the valet stand, handing my ticket to a young man who looked at me with wide eyes. He had clearly heard the shouting. He didn't say a word, just sprinted off to get my car. As soon as I was alone, the adrenaline crash hit me like a physical weight. My hands, which had been steady, holding the microphone, began to shake so violently I had to clasp them together against my chest. My knees felt like water. I leaned against a stone pillar, taking shallow, ragged breaths, trying to force oxygen into lungs that felt too tight. I had done it. I had nuked the site from orbit. But the radiation sickness was already setting in. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It wasn't a text. It was a call from Maya. "I'm out," I said, answering without preamble. My voice sounded thin, unrecognizable to my own ears. "Did you stay factual?" Maya asked immediately. Her voice was the anchor I needed. No pity, just strategy. "Yes. I showed the invoices. I showed the IP logs. I announced the filing. I didn't scream." "Good," Maya said, the sound of keyboard clacking in the background. "Because the blowback is going to start in about 5 minutes. They will try to destroy you now, Anne. Narcissists don't de-escalate when they're exposed. They scorch the earth. Go home. Do not answer your door. Do not engage with anyone who isn't on the legal team." "Copy that," I whispered. The valet pulled my sedan up. I tipped him $50, probably a guilt reflex, trying to buy back some dignity, and got in. As I drove down the winding resort road passing the gates I would likely never enter again, my phone screen lit up. Then again. Then again. A cascade of notifications illuminated the passenger seat. I didn't look at them until I was parked in the garage of my apartment building, a safe, quiet fortress of glass and concrete that felt a million miles away from Maple Drive. I sat in the dark, the engine ticking as it cooled and scrolled through the wreckage. It was exactly what I expected, yet it still tore at me. The family group chat, which I had been muted in for years, was exploding. "Cousin Sarah, I can't believe you would do that to Claire. You ruined her night. You're selfish. Aunt Jen, family business stays private, Anne. You aired our laundry to strangers. You should be ashamed. Uncle Mike. Your father is distraught. Call him." Half the messages were accusations painting me as the villain who couldn't stand her sister's happiness. But interspersed were others' private DMs from cousins who had kept their distance from the main family branch. "Cousin David, holy shot. Did they really steal that much?" "Second cousin Leah. I always knew something was off with Uncle Robert's money. Are you okay?" Then a notification from Linda, a voice memo. My finger hovered over the play button. I knew I shouldn't listen. I knew I should forward it to Maya for the evidence file. But the daughter in me, the wounded part that had just been slapped, needed to know. I pressed play. "You ungrateful, hateful little bitch." Linda's voice filled the car. It was distorted, wet with tears, but hard as granite. "We gave you everything. We sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay us, by humiliating us. by lying. There was a pause, a ragged intake of breath, and then the tone shifted from victimhood to menace. You think you're so smart with your company and your lawyers? You're nothing. You'll always be nothing without us. Don't think you can walk away from this. We will ruin you. You hear me? You're dead to this family. The message ended. I sat in the silence, the venom of her words soaking into the upholstery. It was the same script she had used my whole life, just amplified. I own you. If I can't control you, I will destroy you. I saved the file. I forwarded it to Maya. Then I went upstairs, poured a glass of water, and stared at the wall until the sun came up. The next morning, the personal fallout bled into the professional. I arrived at the AM Harbor offices at 7:00 a.m., but the whispers beat me there. News travels fast in a mid-sized city, especially when police cruisers are spotted at a high society engagement party. My executive assistant looked nervous when I walked in. There are rumors, Anne, about the audit, about the police report. Schedule an all-hands meeting, I said, bypassing my office and heading straight for the conference room. Virtual and in person, 10 a.m. sharp. I stood before my company 3 hours later. 400 faces, some on screens, some in the room. These were people who relied on me for their mortgages, their health care, their kids' tuition. They looked worried. They had heard the CEO sued her own parents. They were wondering if the company was unstable, if the fraud went deeper. You've heard stories this morning. I began standing at the head of the room. I didn't use a teleprompter. I want to give you the truth. We discovered a series of fraudulent transactions linked to external vendors. These transactions were personal in nature and unauthorized. We have identified the responsible parties, and legal action has been taken to recover the funds. I paused, looking at the faces of my team. The perpetrators were members of my family, I said. A ripple of shock went through the room. I tell you this not for sympathy, but for clarity. This was a violation of our financial controls, which have since been reinforced. The integrity of this company matters more to me than my last name. We found the fraud. We stopped it. And I want to be clear, the company is healthy. No one's jobs are at risk. We are moving forward. There was a moment of silence and then slowly nods. Shoulders dropped. I saw relief. I hadn't spun it. I hadn't hidden. I had treated them with the respect my parents never gave me. That afternoon, I got the text I had been dreading. Claire, can we talk? Please. I met her at a coffee shop on the edge of town, neutral ground. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She wore a hoodie and jeans, looking more like the little sister I used to protect from thunderstorms than the bride-to-be. She didn't order anything. She just sat across from me, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. Ethan called off the engagement, she said quietly. I felt a pang of guilt, sharp and sudden. I'm sorry, Claire. He's a good guy. Maybe with time. He said he couldn't marry into a family that operates like a crime syndicate, she said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. He asked me again if I knew. I told him the truth. I told him I knew Mom and Dad were creative with money, but I didn't know they were stealing from you. He said it didn't matter. He said ignorance is a choice. She looked up at me then. He's right, isn't he? I chose not to ask where the money came from because I liked the flowers. We all have patterns we learned in that house, I said. You were trained to look away. I was trained to fix it. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. The question was raw pleading. All these years. You let us treat you like a failure. You let us laugh at you. You sat there at Christmas dinner while Dad gave you advice on how to save money on groceries, and you were sitting on an empire. Why, Anne? Was it a test? Were you just waiting to trap us? It wasn't a trap, I said, reaching across the table. I hesitated, then pulled my hand back. The boundaries were still too new. I didn't tell you because I wanted to know if it was possible for you to love me without the money. Claire stared at me. If I had come home in a Mercedes, I continued, Mom would have loved the car. Dad would have loved the loans I could give him. But I wanted to know if my sister would love me, just Anne, the one who paints rocks. Claire crumbled. She put her face in her hands and wept right there in the coffee shop. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, I was so used to being the special one. I didn't want to share the spotlight. And now there's no spotlight left." I didn't fix it for her. I didn't offer to pay for a new wedding. I didn't write her a check to make the pain go away. I just sat with her while she cried. It was the first honest interaction we'd had in 20 years. Driving home that evening, the events caught up to me. I stopped at a red light and suddenly, vividly, I felt the slap again. It wasn't a memory. It was a sensory replay. The crack of sound, the sting, the humiliation. I gripped the steering wheel, gasping. I wasn't over it just because I had won. The money didn't fix the fact that my mother hit me. The success didn't erase the look of hatred in my father's eyes. I had excised the tumor, but the wound was deep and it was going to leave a nasty scar. I realized then that winning doesn't feel like victory. It feels like survival. I couldn't go back to my empty apartment. I needed to see something real. I turned the car around and drove toward the south side of the city to a small family-owned Italian restaurant called Tony's. 2 years ago, Tony was on the brink of bankruptcy. His supply chain costs were eating him alive. My company stepped in, restructured his logistics, and gave him a micro-grant to modernize his kitchen. It was a small line item on my balance sheet, but it was his whole life. I walked in. The place was bustling. The smell of garlic and tomatoes was thick in the air. Tony looked up from the pizza oven, wiping flour on his apron. His face lit up when he saw me. "Anne!" he bellowed, coming around the counter. He didn't know I was a CEO. To him, I was just the consultant who helped him out. He enveloped me in a bear hug that smelled like yeast and oregano. "Look at this place, packed on a Tuesday, we're killing it." "It looks great, Tony," I said, my voice steadying. "We just hired 2 new delivery drivers," he beamed, gesturing to the back. "Kids from the neighborhood. Good kids, putting them through college. That's because of you, Anne. You saved us." I looked around the restaurant. I saw families eating dinner. I saw the new drivers laughing by the dispatch counter. I saw a business that was honest, built on hard work and good food. This was mine. Not the biology that bound me to the Mitchells, but the impact I chose to have on the world. My parents had tried to reduce me to a checkbook, to a resource to be mined. But standing there watching Tony pour wine for a couple in the corner, I realized they had failed. They hadn't taken my capacity to build. They hadn't taken my ability to help. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of garlic and baking bread. The phantom sting on my cheek finally mercifully began to fade. I wasn't the daughter they slapped. I was the woman who built this, and that was enough to get me through the night. The wheels of justice do not grind quickly. They grind slowly, methodically, and with a terrifying lack of emotion. In the movies, the villain is led away in handcuffs while the hero watches from a balcony, rain slicking the streets. In reality, it was a series of conference calls, notarized affidavits, and forensic audits that stripped the Mitchell legacy down to the studs. 3 months after the engagement party, the full scope of the theft was codified in a legal filing thicker than a phone book. The total came to $180,000 over 7 years. It wasn't just the party. It was the consulting fees my father had paid himself from my accounts. It was the credit cards opened in my name to pay for vacations I was never invited to. My parents didn't go to prison, though the threat of it hung over them like a guillotine for weeks. In the end, we settled. The district attorney was willing to press charges for identity theft, but I chose a different route, not for their sake, but for mine. I didn't want to spend the next 2 years of my life sitting in a courtroom, staring at the back of my mother's head, listening to her lawyer paint me as the vindictive, estranged daughter. I wanted it over. The terms were simple and absolute. They admitted to the fraud. They agreed to full restitution. To pay it back, they had to sell the house on Maple Drive, the stage where they had performed their success for 30 years. The proceeds went to AM Harbor Group. Whatever was left wasn't enough to buy a condo in their zip code. They moved to a rental 2 towns over, a place where no one knew them, where there was no audience to applaud their performance. Socially, the sentence was far harsher. The important people my mother worshipped were the first to turn. The country club membership was revoked quietly. The dinner invitations stopped. In their world, theft was forgivable, but embarrassment was capital punishment. They had been exposed as frauds, and that stain doesn't wash out. I didn't go to the closing of the house. I didn't visit them to gloat. I realized sitting in my office one rainy Tuesday that I had no desire to see them suffer. I just wanted to be safe from them. I wrote them one final letter. It wasn't an email. It was on paper sent via certified mail through Maya. I kept a copy for myself, not as a souvenir, but as a boundary marker. To Robert and Linda. For 29 years I tried to buy my way into this family. First with obedience, then with silence, and finally with the money you stole. I thought if I just provided enough, if I was successful enough, the criticism would stop and the love would start. I know now that was a transaction you were never capable of completing. The debt is settled, the accounts are closed. But so is the access. You are no longer permitted to contact me. You are no longer permitted to use my name. You do not have a daughter to blame for your misfortunes anymore. You are on your own. I hope you find peace, but you will have to find it without me. Anne. Sending it didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like amputation, painful, necessary, and followed by the phantom sensation of a limb that was no longer there. I had to learn how to walk without the crutch of their approval. It was harder than building the company. There were nights I woke up reaching for my phone, wanting to tell my mom about a win at work before remembering that she would only calculate what that win was worth to her. But nature abhors a vacuum, and I filled the space they left with something that actually mattered. In the spring, I launched the 204 Fund. I named it after the apartment number of the studio where I lived when I first left home, the place where I ate ramen, and dreamed of a life that was mine. It wasn't a charity for tax write-offs. It was a micro-grant program designed specifically for young entrepreneurs who had no family safety net. No rich parents, no connections, just grit. We launched it at a small event in the city. No crystal chandeliers, no flower walls, no string quartet. Just a rented loft with exposed brick good tacos and a room full of people who were hungry to build something. I stood by the bar watching a young woman named Sarah explain her logistics software to Marcus. She was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, and her hands were shaking but her eyes were on fire. I saw myself in her. I saw the terrifying, beautiful potential of someone who has nothing to lose. Maya walked up to me, handing me a sparkling water. "You did this," she said, nodding at the room. "The fund is already fully subscribed. We have 50 applicants for the next cycle." "It's good," I said, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "It feels clean." "It is," she said. Then she hesitated. "You have a notification. I saw it light up on the table." I looked down at my phone. A voicemail from a blocked number. My carrier had filtered it, but the transcript preview popped up on the screen. It was Linda. I stared at the little red dot. Even now, stripped of her house, her status, and her daughter, she couldn't stop. She couldn't let the narrative end without her having the last word. I pressed the button to listen just for a second. "Anne," her voice came through, tinny and laced with that familiar weaponized fragility. "I just wanted to say, I forgive you. I know you're angry and I know you're confused, but your father and we're willing to move past this. We're willing to start over if you just—" I pressed stop. I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't need to hear the conditions. I didn't need to hear the manipulation disguised as mercy. "I forgive you." It was the ultimate narcissist's power move, rewriting reality so that the victim is the one seeking absolution. 6 months ago, that message would have wrecked me. I would have agonized over it. I would have drafted a response. I would have wondered if I was the crazy one. But tonight, standing in a room full of people I respected, people who respected me, the words just dissolved. They had no weight. They were ghost stories told by someone who no longer haunted me. I hit delete. Then I went into the settings and cleared the blocked messages folder entirely. Everything okay? Maya asked, watching me closely. I looked at the phone, then slipped it into my pocket. I looked at Sarah, who was laughing now, confident, supported. I looked at Marcus, who gave me a thumbs up from across the room. I looked at the banner for the 204 fund hanging on the wall, a symbol of what happens when you stop trying to please people who refuse to be pleased and start building your own world. Yeah, I said, and for the first time in my life the word didn't feel like a defense mechanism. It felt like a fact. Everything is perfect. I didn't say I got revenge. I didn't say I won. Those were games for the people I left behind on Maple Drive. I turned away from the empty dark of the phone screen and walked into the noise and light of the party. That night, my parents had tried to make me small. They had tried to crush me into a shape that fit their needs. But as I joined the circle of friends who were waiting for me, I realized the truth. What they really did was finally set me free. Anne finally walked away, proving that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to leave the people who claim to love you. If you enjoyed this story of justice and hard-won freedom, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. What would you have done in her place? We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.